Alright, what's going on, everybody? So this is my Battlefield 5 review. So let's start off with the story. The war story, specifically. So War Stories, which premiered in Battlefield 1, has returned in 5. War Stories was praised by most people because it was able to tell an emotional and engrossing stories from multiple diverse perspectives of soldiers in war in a condensed and concise format. War Stories in 5, unfortunately, fails to provide the same level of likable characters and the same level of narrative that was in its predecessor. Although most of the war stories in 1 still left you with a feeling of wanting more, it still felt like a complete package from start to finish. I think it's the setup and the exposition in the war stories in 5 that seem to kind of disrupt the cohesiveness of the storytelling. You know, telling stories and tales of obscure but based on true events of heroes that were not celebrated or properly recognized is usually the theme of war stories, which is what makes it so interesting. It's not the typical story that we usually see in games based on wars in the past, and I think that's the best part of war stories. The ending of each story was pretty predictable, but the best war story out of all 4 that are now currently available is The Last Tiger. And that's a war story that was released a few weeks after the launch of the actual game. It was locked and there were only 3 war stories initially, and this war story lets you play from the perspective of a Nazi tank commander towards the end of the war when the German forces were close to being defeated. This is a different and unexplored perspective. Some would say probably an unpopular, and I would say it's not as risky in 2018 to do something like this, but I gotta say this story was the most captivating. I would say a decade ago, if you were to, and I don't believe this is the first. This is not the first game to do something from a Nazi point of view. It's not the first, I believe. I think there might have been one other. But a decade ago, if you were to do this in a game, allow the player to play from a Nazi point of view or anybody on the Axis forces, that would have came with a lot of controversy. But because we've been playing as the same perspective for so long, it's pretty much welcome now. And people understand that this is just, the point of it is to just show the war from different perspectives. It's not necessarily to make, you know, the Nazi perspective look right or correct. It's just showing a different side of it, and which is what we need to see. And yeah, of course you're killing, you know, allied forces and everything like that. But I think this one was done in a tasteful manner. So War Stories is still worth playing, but it's just a slight step down in its plot and in its mission design structure. So specifically with the gameplay of the single player, I'm going to move into the focus on the multiplayer a little bit halfway through. But the single player gameplay is pretty much what you would expect, apart from a few new gameplay mechanics involving weather. Each story has multiple mission objectives, which can be addressed in any order you choose, but the order you do it in has no real bearing on the result. Each mission can be handled, you know, stealthy or in a direct manner, which doesn't really have much bearing on what happens in the end either, because it's pretty much up to a certain point where the game allows you to be either stealthy or be direct. It's kind of restrictive in that manner depending on the mission. And Battlefield 5 has the highest level of like customization for mouse and keyboard and controllers in the industry, and I think that should be, you know, copied and mimicked as a standard for all games, especially on PC. So shifting the focus to the multiplayer, a lot of changes and fine-tuning have been made. You know, weapon balancing, class unlocks and abilities. I feel like they've been tamed a little bit more and tuned to fall more in line with what class and what that class should specialize in. You know, there's a good amount of modes and and the maps seem to lack the same imagination and intricate design and verticality as Battlefield 1, but I still think the multiplayer is fun, it's well crafted, and it's actually better balanced, and it encourages more team play. There does seem to be a little bit less of an inclusion and a focus on vehicular combat in Battlefield 5. It doesn't seem like they dominate the battlefield or have as much of an impact on the battlefield as it did in 1 or the previous games. Initially, it took a while for me to adjust how the weapons behaved in this game, because in Battlefield 5 there seems to be more of this strange like horizontal and vertical recoil on most of the weapons, and with the previous games, most games just have like this very straightforward vertical recoil. Now this recoil in this game seems to be a little bit less predictable, and just the way the bullet drop is and the ballistics seems to be a little bit different, especially with the weapons that are available early on. So I had to adjust to that, and it seems like burst firing is even sometimes I feel like at medium range seems to be something you have to do more often than in the previous games. But I think the multiplayer is still a great fun experience. Like I said, I believe the maps are a little bit disappointing, a little bit underwhelming so far as what I played. I like the different modes, as I said, but the maps just don't seem to have that same charm and same fun factor and good design as that I expect from a Battlefield game, unfortunately. So as we expect from a Battlefield game, the visuals are absolutely beautiful, but it doesn't have that like wow effect that it once had, where we seen Battlefield and we were blown away by the visuals. It doesn't have that effect, and that could be because I think a lot of us are used to that, but it could also be because the game has hit like a threshold or a visual ceiling. Now every Battlefield game does look better than the previous, but it's marginal. It's minuscule visual improvements. I think to get the leap in visuals that initially blowed our minds back in the day with like Bad Company 2 or Battlefield 3, we might have to wait a little bit further in the future for that. But that being said, I mean, the texture quality and the filtering just creates this just immaculate and clean environment and presentation. The particle effects make the actual war environments look really chaotic and just destructive, and the physics and destruction, I still feel like it's never been up to par with what we got in Bad Company 2 or 3 or even 4. I still don't feel like the level of destruction has matched that yet. Shadows and lighting, are great, because of the ambient occlusion. The terrain quality and physics are important because, there's different terrains in this game. The mud, the snow, the mesh, and post-processing help to make the game look really crisp and clean. The game is, very optimized. I was able to play at 1440p 60 when I was playing the single player. No real issues or drops or anything like that. When I'm playing the multiplayer, of course, it is better to run your game at lower settings on multiplayer. I pretty much put everything on medium and the game still looks good. Once again, though, developers for some reason choose to have horrible settings like chromatic aberration, film grain on by default. Make sure you turn that off. I had to turn that off because that actually degrades and reduces image quality, but developers nowadays for some reason think it makes the game look good, but it doesn't. But Battlefield is an amazing looking game. So before I give my actual verdict, I want to go off a little bit on a tangent. The PR surrounding Battlefield 5 clearly hurt it, and I understand and I agree EA has a dislikable heel reputation that distracts from the actual product they produce. Because I've said this before, you can hate EA and that's cool. I'm fine. I don't like EA as a company, but I personally separate the publisher and the developer from the game. I separate them, and because the fact is, as I've said before, terrible developers or publishers, and it's more a publisher in this situation, a terrible publisher, they produce good games sometimes. It's just a fact. And EA publishes some good games. DICE makes really good games. DICE makes really good Battlefield games. So I just disagree with punishing the product or the developer for the actions of the publisher. That's my stand on things. So even if I hate a publisher, I'm not gonna refuse to buy the game just because of my feelings towards them, because I just care about the product itself. I don't care about, the things going on behind the scenes and the politics of all that. So I understand, the backlash of the trailers of Battlefield 5 and why people were upset and the stupid comments made by EA and everything like that really put people off. But the fact is that Battlefield 5 is a really great game.